Jesus is heartbroken at the resistance he's getting from his own Jewish brothers and sisters who should have known better. This is an emotional outburst by Jesus in verse 34 of Luke 13. Oh, Jerusalem, you can hear the grief in his voice there. The city that kills the prophets, that's what they normally did. The prophets had to speak to Israel from the time the prophets began onwards. Generally, the prophets were not listened to. So the whole history of Judaism was a tragic one. How often then I wanted you to listen to me and you wouldn't? I wanted to gather your children together, but you wouldn't have it. That's exactly the text that I gave you earlier in relation to another question. That's the question, that's the verse which says, their eyes they have closed. God says, all right, you want to be blind? I'll show you what it's like to be blind. You'll get blinder and blinder. Once you shake your fist at the words of Jesus and the words of the Bible, then blindness takes you over and you're going to have a much harder time recovering from that increased blindness. So that's a marvelous verse. The choice is theirs.
So this imagery is taken, of course, from the Old Testament and what God Himself says to the Old Testament Israel of the flesh, as Paul calls them. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. He will shelter you with His pinions, and under His wings you may take refuge. So Jesus is borrowing, if you will, from that imagery because now He, as the Messiah, the Son of God, is the Savior of Israel. He is the promised one. So he fulfills the role here that Yahweh himself, God the Father, promised to be for the Israel of the flesh at that point. Interesting quote from N.T. Wright. This is the Challenge of Jesus book. When the fire has run its course, there will be found a dead hen, scorched and blackened, but with live chicks under her wing. Jesus seemed to be indicating his hope that he would take upon himself the judgment that was hanging over the nation and city. So that's an interesting look at the fulfillment that the Messiah brings, embodying those promises of God as the Savior, as the hen, protector of Israel. And yes, it's a very sad scene, and it's also expressed, as you know, Anthony, in Matthew 23:37, almost verbatim. The name Jesus himself, as we know, Anthony, means Yah saves, that is, Jehovah, Yahweh
Yes.
saves.
And of course, how often I wanted to gather you is not a reference to before Jesus began to exist. He's looking back on his own ministry. He's not talking about anything in Old Testament times. He's simply saying, all the time I've been ministering to you with the gospel of the kingdom as your Messiah, I've longed that you would listen to my teaching and follow me, because that's the only way of escaping the wrath of God which hangs over you, as Tom Wright said so nicely there.